A word of warning, this video is about politics. So if you're still watching, let's begin, because today the UK has a new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. And if you're watching from abroad, we haven't had an election per se. There was a vote of no confidence in Parliament in the outgoing Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. That then triggers a leadership contest in which only members of the ruling Conservative Party are allowed to vote. But yesterday, no sooner than the result being announced, that social media erupted with the sort of people who back in March 2020 became self-proclaimed medical experts, not because they were doctors or scientists or listened to said doctors and scientists. No, they got their information from Reddit and YouTube. Well, those people, for the last 24 hours, have all become political analysts. All over social media, overexcited people were claiming Liz Truss will be worse than Margaret Thatcher. She'll wreck the economy. And for those people, I'd say, quick heads up, the economy's already fucked. Another very common theme was saying that Britain is a racist country, and it's been proven because Liz Truss's main rival was Rishi Sunak. And if you're from outside the UK again, Mr. Sunak is a brown gentleman, a very short brown gentleman. But I would argue, I think the Tories, which is the Conservative Party, are savvy enough to know that as this country is going into a massive recession, when just a few weeks ago it was revealed that Rishi Sunak's wife is a tax-dodging billionaire, that wouldn't go down well with the electorate. And we can always flip the argument, stop it being about race and make it about sex. Because it could be argued, why do you want Rishi Sunak to be PM? Do you have a problem with a female Prime Minister? She's our third female Prime Minister. Fuck, we're progressive. Personally, I'm going to do something which many people will find insane. I'm going to wait until she's laid out her policies before I cast judgment. I'm not saying that I like her, and I'm not saying that I don't, but I don't want to jump to conclusions. And in all honesty, would you want to be Prime Minister at the moment, at the end of the COVID pandemic, at the beginning of a global recession, 10 days left to sort the Northern Ireland Protocol, interest rates the highest they've been since the 1970s, and a war in Europe? Sod that for a game of soldiers. So the Conservatives have been in power for over a decade, and they've been able to do pretty much what they want. Because there hasn't been any form of credible opposition. Again, for people from outside the UK, there are three main political parties: the Conservatives, Labour and the Liberal Democrats. Now the Labour Party, the main opposition, they are run by Sir Keir Starmer, a man so forgettable I doubt his wife could pick him out of an identity parade. And his whole approach to politics appears to be to criticise everything the government says and does, but never offers a fucking alternative. And as for the Liberal Democrats, I don't know who their leader is. And I listen to Radio 4 driving to and from work. It's nothing but news and politics. But the Lib Dems are that fucking irrelevant, I don't know who's in charge. I know who the most famous ex-Liberal Democrat is. Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister. Anyway, this got me thinking about the Prime Ministers we've had this century. So first up, we had Tony Blair, who was voted into office in 1997, and I'll hold my hand up, I voted for Blair. And when he came into office, it was all smiles and things can only get better, and New Labour and Cool Britannia. And by the time he left office, Iraq was in ruins, and most of us were wondering how he hadn't been charged as a war criminal. Honestly, if Blair had 2 more years in government, Britain would be the first country with a fully functioning Death Star. Next up came Gordon Brown, the man described by Jeremy Clarkson as a one-eyed Scottish idiot. He'd been inept as a Chancellor, and as a Prime Minister he was even worse. He wasn't voted in a general election, he was voted in by members of the Labour Party. And when the global economy collapsed in 2008, an event known as the credit crunch, it was revealed that under his stewardship, Britain had sold all its gold reserves at a time when gold was at an all-time low. Therefore, there was no buffer, and thousands of people lost their jobs. I was one of them. Therefore, the next general election was won by the Conservatives, and we got David Cameron as a Prime Minister. And I'll be honest, I didn't mind Cameron. Yes, he was a posh Etonian twat, but that's what you get with Conservative leaders. Most of them are posh Etonian twats. He made some difficult choices and got the economy going again. But when the EU referendum came round, and it didn't go the way he wanted it to, he spat his dummy out and fucked off. So that brought in Theresa May, a Prime Minister devoid of any personality. In fact, when I saw her dancing onto stage, it's the only time I thought we may be being ruled by robot overlords. So that brings us to the outgoing Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. He'd already been something of a celebrity, known for appearing on panel shows. He'd been the Mayor of London, and he was well known for gimmicks and buffoonery. However, I think most of us in the UK, on the day it was announced he was our new Prime Minister, looked at the television and thought, fuck me, he's in charge. However, to be fair to him, it wasn't long into his premiership that COVID struck and the world changed forever. The furlough scheme kept millions of people in their jobs. Again, I'm one of them. And the vaccine rollout, that's the closest thing I've ever seen to a miracle. The world was on its knees and Britain stepped up. But then, it transpired that back in Christmas of 2020, when all of us in Britain were locked on our houses, unable to see our nearest and dearest, at number 10, they were having full-blown parties and laughing at the electorate. To me, that shows utter contempt for the British people. So that's former Prime Ministers, but what about leaders of the opposition? In the last 10 years, only one, for me, has stood out, often for the wrong reasons, and that's Jeremy Corbyn. Now, he was very popular with the left, particularly the far left and the woke, because he was a barely veiled communist. However, he was battered at the general election because, well, I think the main reason was he had a very murky past. He was often praising groups like Hezbollah and was chatty with the IRA before the Good Friday Agreement. He was seen hanging out with Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness from Sinn Féin. And Sinn Féin at the time was the political wing of the IRA. So he was being friends at the same time that a known terrorist group was blowing the shit out of cities in Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That doesn't go down well with the general population. But he did used to fuck Diane Abbott, so he's a braver man than me. And it was under Corbyn's stewardship, just after the EU referendum, or Brexit as it's better known, when Britain decided by a narrow margin to leave the EU, that Labour adopted a very strange tactic. Every time a Labour politician was interviewed and was asked about the people who voted to leave, they would imply that they were racist bigots. But it never occurred to the Labour Party that the places in the UK where the highest percentage of people voted to leave the EU, they were all fucking Labour strongholds. So going round calling your core voters racist simpletons, implying they're borderline neo-Nazis, that doesn't go down well with people. I live in Stoke-on-Trent. 70% of the people here voted to leave the EU. Are they all racists? No. This is the most tolerant place I know. So, to wrap this incredibly dull video up, and if you've made it this far, well done. Will Liz Truss fuck it up? It's too early to say. Maybe she will, maybe she won't. But if she is a bad Prime Minister, as we've seen, she's definitely not the first and she won't be the last. As ever, thanks for watching. Just before I go, this is what I would do if I was the new Prime Minister. I think the people of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, they need a boost, they need to feel better about themselves, and nothing gives you that nice warm glow like nostalgia. So within 10 minutes of me entering 10 Downing Street, I'd tell one of my aides, call the RAF, we're going to bomb Germany.